When I heard the loud knock on my front door that morning, I thought it was the mailman. It was raining softly outside, the kind of rain that makes the air smell like wet earth and memories. I wiped my hands on the kitchen towel and opened the door with a smile. And there they were, my son Daniel and my daughter-in-law Maya, standing beside a big moving truck. For a moment, I couldn't say anything. Daniel looked tired, his eyes searching mine for something. Maybe understanding, maybe forgiveness. Maya gave me a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Behind them, the movers were already unloading boxes. "Mom, can we come in?" Daniel asked quietly. I nodded, still trying to understand what was happening. The rain had started falling harder now, small drops landing on their suitcases. I stepped aside and watched as they carried their things into my living room, the same room where Daniel took his first steps, where we once put up our Christmas tree every year. My heart felt heavy and warm at the same time. I wanted to ask 100 questions. Why didn't you call? Is everything all right? Are you staying long? But something stopped me. Maybe it was the look on Maya's face, a mixture of worry and embarrassment. So instead of asking, I simply said, "You must be cold. Let me make some tea." That's what mothers do, don't they? When life brings confusion, we go to the kitchen. We boil water, we slice some ginger, and we try to calm our hearts by stirring sugar into a cup. As the kettle whistled, I heard them moving furniture in the next room. Boxes thumped softly against the floor. I realized then, this wasn't a short visit. They weren't just dropping by. They were moving in. I stood by the stove, the steam touching my face, and felt the weight of silence. No phone call, no warning, just a truck, two tired faces, and a house that suddenly didn't feel like mine alone anymore. When I brought the tea into the living room, Daniel smiled at me like a child again. "Thanks, Mom," he said, as if nothing was unusual. Maya murmured a polite thank you and looked down at her cup. I sat across from them, pretending to sip my tea, but my hands were trembling slightly. Outside, the rain slowed to a soft drizzle. Inside, everything was quiet, too quiet. That's when I realized something deep inside me had changed. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel hurt. I just felt calm. And maybe that calmness was what surprised them the most, because instead of crying, questioning, or complaining, I smiled. And that simple smile, gentle, quiet, maybe even a little sad, was the moment everything in our story truly began. When Daniel and Maya moved their boxes into the spare room, I tried not to let my thoughts run too far ahead. I told myself it might be temporary. Maybe they were renovating their apartment or waiting for a new place to open up. But deep down, I already knew it wasn't that simple. That evening, after they settled in, the house felt different. Every sound, the closing of a door, the clinking of dishes, even the hum of the refrigerator carried a new rhythm. It wasn't bad, just different. I hadn't shared my home with anyone for nearly 5 years. Since my husband, Robert, passed away, the house had grown quiet. At first, that silence was unbearable. I used to wake up expecting to hear him making coffee, whistling softly like he always did. But mornings became still, and over time, I learned to live inside that stillness. I found peace in small things, watering my plants, watching the birds in the garden, or reading by the window in the afternoon sun. Daniel would call me sometimes, but not often. He had his own life, his own struggles, and I tried not to bother him. When he married Maya 3 years ago, I was happy for him. Maya seemed sweet, polite, and practical, a bit quiet, but kind. We never got too close, but I always hoped time would change that. So seeing them suddenly at my door that morning with the truck full of furniture and no explanation stirred something in me I couldn't name. Not anger, not sadness, something gentler, maybe concern, maybe love mixed with confusion. That night, After they went to bed, I sat alone in the living room with my cup of tea, listening to the rain again. It had stopped for a while, but started up softly, tapping against the windows like an old friend, reminding me of the past. I looked at the family photos on the wall. Daniel in his graduation cap, Robert holding him as a baby, our last vacation by the lake. I whispered to Robert's picture, "Looks like we have company again, dear." And I smiled. The next morning, I woke early. The house was filled with the smell of toast and coffee. Maya was in the kitchen, quietly making breakfast. She looked up, a little startled to see me. "Oh, good morning, Mom," she said, her voice soft. I smiled back. "Good morning, dear. You're up early." She nodded. I couldn't sleep much. We have a lot on our minds. I didn't ask what she meant. I just helped her slice some fruit and set the table. It felt strange having another woman in my kitchen again, but there was also something comforting about it. The sound of another person moving around, the clatter of dishes, the smell of butter on toast. For a moment, it felt like life had returned to these walls. When Daniel came down, he looked tired, but relieved. He gave me a quick hug and said, "Thanks for letting us stay, Mom. We really needed this." I simply nodded and said, "You're always welcome here." And I meant it, even though I didn't know what was really going on. After breakfast, they left to run some errands. I stayed behind and tidied up, trying not to let my thoughts wander. But my mind kept going back to the look on Maya's face, that quiet, worried look, like she was carrying something heavy inside her. I had seen that same look once in my own mirror years ago, when Robert and I were struggling to make ends meet. That afternoon, I decided to prepare the guest room a little better for them, added fresh sheets, folded extra towels, and placed a small vase of flowers by the bed. As I was adjusting the curtains, I noticed a suitcase still half open on the floor. Inside were clothes, a few photo frames, and a bundle of documents held together with a rubber band. I quickly looked away. It wasn't my place to peek. But one thing caught my eye. A framed photo of Daniel and Maya smiling on their wedding day. I remembered that day clearly. How happy they looked. How full of dreams they were. I sighed softly and whispered to Robert, "Looks like we have company again, dear." That evening, Daniel sat with me in the living room while Maya rested upstairs. The television was on, but neither of us were really watching. After a long pause, he said quietly, "Mom, I hope it's okay that we're here for a while." "Of course. This is your home too." He nodded, looking down at his hands. "I'll explain everything soon. I just need a little time." I reached out and touched his arm. "You don't have to explain right now, Daniel. Take your time." For a moment, his eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them away, smiled faintly, and said, "Thanks, Mom. You've always been patient with me." When he went upstairs, I sat there in the dim light of the lamp, feeling both peaceful and uneasy. A mother's heart can sense when something is wrong, even when no words are spoken. And that night, my heart was whispering a quiet warning. Days turned into a week. They helped around the house, cooked meals, and spent evenings together with me. From the outside, it looked almost perfect, like a small family reunion. But I could feel an invisible wall between them. Maya was polite, but distant. Daniel tried to hide his worry behind small jokes and busy movements. One afternoon, I found Maya sitting alone in the garden, staring at nothing. I brought her a cup of tea and sat beside her. She smiled faintly and said, "You have such a peaceful home." "Thank you," I replied softly. Peace took a long time to find. She nodded, then, after a pause, said, "I hope we don't disturb it." Something in her tone made me look at her more closely. There was sadness there, deep and quiet. But before I could ask anything, she stood up and said she had to finish some work inside. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that moving truck, about their tired faces, about Maya's distant eyes. Something had brought them here, something painful enough to make them leave everything behind without a word. And whatever it was now part of my home too. I turned off the lamp and whispered into the darkness, "Please let them find peace here." Because that's what I wanted most. Not explanations, not apologies, just peace. And though I didn't know it yet, that simple wish was about to be tested in ways I never imagined. The first few weeks went by quietly. We found a rhythm: morning tea together, light chatter during dinner, the usual household noises that fill up a home. But beneath that quiet rhythm, I could feel a kind of tension building, like wind pressing against a closed window. It started with small things. Maya often stayed in their room for hours, working on her laptop or talking softly on the phone. Daniel would sit with me in the living room, pretending to read or scroll through his phone, but I could tell his mind was somewhere else. When they did talk to each other, their words were polite, too polite, the kind of politeness that hides something deeper. I tried not to intrude. It's hard for a mother not to interfere, but I knew that some things needed to be faced privately. Still, I couldn't ignore the heavy silence between them. It followed them from room to room like an invisible fog. One evening, I was folding laundry in a living room when I heard raised voices upstairs. Daniel's voice, frustrated. Maya's, trembling but firm. I couldn't make out the words, only the tone. Sharp, tired, wounded. Then footsteps and a door closing softly. A few minutes later, Maya came downstairs. She avoided my eyes and went straight to the kitchen. I followed slowly, pretending I needed some water. She was standing by the counter, holding a cup but not drinking. "Are you all right, dear?" I asked gently. She nodded quickly. "Yes, I'm fine, Mom. Just a bit tired." I wanted to comfort her, to tell her she didn't have to pretend, but I also knew she might not be ready to share. So I just said, "Sometimes, when I'm tired, I sit by the garden for a while. The air helps." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I'll try that." Later that night, Daniel came down too. He looked upset, but tried to hide it behind a smile. "Everything okay?" I asked quietly. He nodded, rubbing his forehead. "Yeah, just a small argument. We'll be fine." I didn't press further, but as he went back upstairs, I heard the way he sighed, deep, heavy, like a man carrying too much on his shoulders. The next morning, I found Maya in the garden, just as I had suggested. She was sitting on the bench, watching the sunlight move through the leaves. I brought her a cup of tea without saying a word. She smiled softly. "You really have a way of knowing when someone needs tea." I laughed gently. Tea solves more problems than words sometimes. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to say something. Her lips parted, then closed again. Finally, she said, "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Were you ever unhappy in your marriage?" The question took me by surprise. I thought for a moment before answering. "Yes," I said quietly. "Sometimes. Every marriage has its seasons, some full of sunshine, some cloudy, but we always found our way back to each other." She nodded slowly, eyes glistening a little. "Daniel and I are just going through a rough time." I reached out and placed my hand on hers. "That happens, dear. It doesn't mean it's the end. It just means you both need time and kindness." She nodded again, but didn't look convinced. After a while, she whispered, "He lost his job 2 months ago. We didn't tell anyone. Things have been difficult since then." Ah, suddenly a few things made sense. The stress on Daniel's face, the quiet arguments, the sudden move. I said softly, "You did the right thing coming here. Sometimes we need to rest before we start again. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she quickly wiped them away. I just don't want him to think I'm disappointed in him. I smiled gently. If you love him, he already knows you're not. She gave me a small, grateful smile, then went back inside. That afternoon, I found Daniel sitting on the porch steps, staring at the driveway. I sat beside him quietly. After a long pause, he said, "I guess Maya told you." I nodded slowly. She told me enough to understand. He let out a bitter laugh. I feel like I failed, Mom. I thought I could handle everything. Work, marriage, bills. But it all fell apart so fast. I wanted to tell him that failure isn't the end, that every man faces storms. But I could see that right now he didn't need advice, just someone to listen. So I said quietly, "You haven't failed, Daniel. You're still trying. That's what matters." He didn't reply, but his eyes softened a little. Over the next few days, things seemed calmer. They talked more, laughed occasionally, even helped me repaint the kitchen. For a brief time, I thought the worst had passed, but the peace didn't last long. One Sunday morning, while cleaning, I accidentally overheard them again. This time, it was Maya's voice, low but tense. "I can't keep living like this, Daniel. I need to know what we're doing next." Daniel's voice rose slightly. "I'm trying, Maya. Do you think I like this? Staying here, watching Mom worry about us?" I froze where I was, my hands still on the dish towel. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but their voices carried down the hall. "I just want some honesty," Maya said quietly. "I can't fix what I don't understand." Silence followed, long and heavy. Then I heard footsteps, and the conversation ended. That day, Maya stayed mostly in her room. Daniel went out for a drive and didn't return until late. When he finally came back, I was sitting in the living room with the lamp on, reading. He looked exhausted. "Rough day?" I asked softly. He nodded, collapsing onto the couch. "I don't know what's happening anymore, Mom," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "We used to be so happy. Now it feels like we're just two strangers trying not to argue." I set my book aside. Marriage can feel like that sometimes, but love doesn't disappear. It just gets quiet when both people are tired. He looked at me with tired eyes. "Do you think we'll be okay?" I smiled faintly. "If you both still care enough to ask that question, yes, I think you will." He leaned back, closing his eyes, and for a moment he looked like the little boy who used to run to me after scraping his knee, lost but still trusting that things could heal. But inside, I was beginning to worry. Their silence had changed. It wasn't the peaceful kind anymore. It was thick, uncomfortable, full of unspoken words. Meals became shorter, conversations turned into nods. Even laughter felt forced, like they were trying too hard to pretend. One evening, I invited them both to dinner. Something simple, just to bring everyone together. I made Robert's favorite stew, the one Daniel used to love as a child. As we sat down, I tried to keep the conversation light. "Remember when you were 10, I said to Daniel, smiling, and you tried to cook pancakes for your dad's birthday?" He chuckled softly. "Yeah, and I burned half the kitchen." For a moment, the tension eased. Maya smiled too. But then Daniel mentioned, "I used to think I'd never fail again after that." The smile faded from her face. Silence fell again. Heavy, awkward. I quickly changed the subject, but the warmth had left the room. After dinner, they both thanked me and went upstairs quietly. When I began washing the dishes, I felt tears sting my eyes. Not for myself, but for them. Because I could see how much they were struggling to hold on, and how quietly that struggle was breaking them. That night, as I turned off the kitchen light, I whispered to the empty room, "Please, let love find its way back to them." The next day, something small but painful happened. I walked into the living room and found Maya crying softly by the window. When she noticed me, she quickly wiped her tears. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. It's just been a hard morning." I went to her and gently placed my hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to apologize for feeling, dear." She took a shaky breath. "Sometimes I wonder if he still loves me the same way." Her words broke something inside me. No mother ever wants to hear that kind of doubt from her child's partner, especially when she loves them both. I said quietly, "Love doesn't always look like it used to. Sometimes it hides behind fear or pride. But if you listen closely, it's still there." She nodded, but didn't answer. That evening, when Daniel came home, I noticed the coldness between them again. Polite words, careful tone, no eye contact. I tried to make small talk, to lighten the air, but their smiles didn't reach their eyes. And so the days grew heavier. Each morning I woke up hoping for laughter, for the sound of ease returning to the house, but instead the silence grew deeper. One afternoon, while watering the plants outside, I saw Maya sitting in the car, staring blankly at the steering wheel. Daniel was standing a few steps away, his hands in his pockets. They weren't talking, just existing beside each other, separated by invisible walls. I wanted to walk up to them, to remind them of love, patience, and the home they were building, but I knew I couldn't fix it for them. Some storms can't be stopped. They just have to be weathered. As I watched them from the garden, a painful thought crossed my mind. Maybe my calmness, my quiet acceptance when they first arrived, wasn't helping. Maybe they needed something more. A voice, a boundary, a truth. But I wasn't sure what that truth was yet. And deep inside, I began to feel the first quiet tremor of something coming. Something that would change everything between us. Because peace, I was learning, doesn't last forever, not until the truth finally finds its way into the open. It was a Wednesday morning when everything finally came to the surface. The kind of morning that feels heavy before the day even begins. The sky was gray, the air thick with the promise of rain. I woke early, hearing the faint murmur of voices upstairs. At first I thought it was just another small disagreement, but then I heard Maya's voice break, that soft, trembling sound of someone trying not to cry. Something inside me told me that this was not like the other days. I stayed in the kitchen, pretending to busy myself with breakfast. I didn't want to intrude, but I also couldn't walk away. Their words slowly reached me, quiet at first, then clearer, sharper. "You promised me, Daniel," Maya said. Her voice was shaking, full of hurt. "You said we'd start over. You said things would be different." Daniel's reply came lower, heavier. "I'm trying, Maya. I'm doing my best. What more do you want from me?" "I want honesty," she cried. The word echoed down the stairs and landed right in my chest. There was a long pause, and then Daniel said something I wasn't ready to hear. "I didn't lose my job because of the company, Maya. I lost it because I made a mistake. A big one." I froze, my hands still holding the teacup. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air too thick to breathe. Maya's voice came again, softer now. "What kind of mistake?" Silence. Then Daniel said, "I signed the wrong contract. It cost the company thousands. They covered it up quietly, but they let me go. I was too ashamed to tell you." I heard a quiet gasp. Hers, maybe mine too. Then his voice again, cracked with guilt. "I thought I could fix it. I thought I could start something new before you found out, but everything fell apart." For a long moment, There was no sound except the rain beginning outside. Then Maya spoke, barely a whisper. "All this time, you kept it from me." Daniel said nothing. And then, quietly, she said, "You didn't just lose your job, Daniel. You lost my trust." The door upstairs opened. Footsteps. A suitcase dragging softly across the floor. I set the teacup down and went to the hallway just as Maya came down the stairs, tears streaking her face, her hands shaking as she held the handle of her small suitcase. "Where are you going, dear?" I asked softly. She stopped but didn't look at me. "I just need to get some air in there right now. I can't breathe." I wanted to stop her, to tell her to wait, to calm down, but the look in her eyes stopped me. It wasn't anger. It was heartbreak. And heartbreak needs space. So I simply said, "Be careful, sweetheart. It's raining." She nodded, opened the door, and stepped into the gray morning. I stood there, watching her walk down the driveway until the rain swallowed her figure. When I turned around, Daniel was standing halfway down the stairs, pale and broken. "She's leaving," he said softly, like a child who couldn't believe what he'd done. I didn't answer. I just reached out and guided him to sit. He buried his face in his hands. "Mom, I ruined everything." I sat beside him in silence. There are moments when words are useless, when all a mother can do is sit close enough for her child to know he's not alone. After a while, I said quietly, "Everyone ruins something in their life, Daniel. What matters is what you do next." He looked up at me, his eyes red. "Do you think she'll come back?" I hesitated before answering. "If she loves you, and I believe she does, she'll need time, but she will find her way back. But you have to be ready to tell her the truth. All of it." He nodded weakly. The rest of that day moved like slow motion. The rain didn't stop. It poured down for hours, washing over the windows, drumming on the roof. Daniel stayed mostly silent, pacing, sometimes sitting, sometimes staring at nothing. I made soup, but neither of us ate much. By evening, the house felt emptier than it had in years. Not because someone had left it, but because love had stepped outside for a while. When night came, I went to Daniel's room and found him sitting by the window. He looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped. Without turning to me, he said, "Mom, I've never felt this ashamed." I went and stood beside him. "Shame doesn't make you better, son. Honesty does." He nodded slowly. "I don't even know where to start." "Start with forgiving yourself. Then be honest, not because it will fix everything, but because you can't heal while hiding." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You know, Dad would have been disappointed in me." I smiled faintly. "Your father made plenty of mistakes too, Daniel. We both did. But he always said, mistakes are proof you're trying. It's the silence that breaks families, not failure." That night, I couldn't sleep again. The rain finally stopped, but the silence it left behind was louder than before. I lay there thinking about Maya, where she might have gone, who she might be talking to, and I thought about Daniel, sitting upstairs, trying to find courage in his shame. I realized then that this was more than their fight. It was a mirror of something I had once lived myself. Years ago, when Robert lost his first job, he didn't tell me either. He went weeks pretending everything was fine, carrying the weight alone until one night he broke down. I remember how I held him and told him the same thing I told Daniel, that love doesn't disappear just because life gets hard. And now here I was, watching history echo itself, hoping it would end differently this time. The next morning, Daniel was gone when I woke up. There was a note on the kitchen counter. "Mom, I went to find her. Don't worry, I'll be back." The handwriting was shaky, but determined. I folded the note carefully and kept it in my apron pocket, like something fragile. The house felt too quiet again. I made my tea, watered the plants, tried to read, but my thoughts kept drifting back to them, to the way she looked when she left, to the way he looked when he broke. By afternoon, the sky cleared. Sunlight spilled through the windows, touching everything with a soft, golden calm. I stood by the door, looking at the empty driveway, and whispered, "Please bring them home safe." Hours passed. Just when evening began to fall, I heard the sound of a car stopping outside. My heart jumped. I opened the door, and there they were, Daniel and Maya, standing side by side, soaked from the rain again. Faces pale, but calm. They looked tired, but not angry. "Mom, can we come in?" Daniel said softly. I nodded and stepped aside. Inside, they stood silently for a moment. Then Maya spoke first. "I'm sorry for leaving like that, Mom. I just needed to think." I touched her hand gently. "You don't have to apologize, dear. Sometimes stepping away is the only way to see clearly." Daniel looked at her, his eyes full of guilt and love. "I told her everything," he said quietly. Maya nodded slowly. "He did." She looked down, then up again, and there was softness in her eyes this time. "I'm still hurt, but I also know he's trying. I don't want to give up on us." Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. I smiled through them and said, "Then maybe this rain was worth it." They both smiled faintly. For the first time in weeks, the air felt lighter. We sat down together in the living room, the same place where their story here had begun. No words for a while, just quiet breathing and the ticking of the clock. Finally, Maya said softly, "I think I was angry not just because he hid it, but because I was scared too. I didn't want to face what it meant." Daniel took her hand carefully. "I know. I should have trusted you." The way they looked at each other then, fragile, tired, but honest, reminded me of how Robert and I once looked at each other after our first big fight. Love doesn't always roar back. Sometimes it just sighs and says, "I'm still here." That night, after they went to bed, I sat alone again in the living room. The rain had returned, softer now, tapping the windows gently, like it was blessing the house. I looked at the family photos on the wall again, the ones that had witnessed every season of our lives, and I realized something I hadn't before. Every family breaks a little, sooner or later. It's not the breaking that defines us. It's the quiet, stubborn act of mending. I thought of how they arrived here, unannounced, with a truck full of boxes and unspoken pain, and how after all the silence and storms, they were finally beginning to speak again. I whispered softly, "Thank you, Robert. Maybe they'll be okay after all." Outside, the wind carried the scent of wet earth again, the same smell from that first morning when they arrived. Only now it felt different. It smelled like beginning again. The next day, Daniel and Maya joined me for breakfast. It was simple, toast, eggs, and tea, but there was warmth in the air that hadn't been there for a long time. Daniel smiled more easily now. Maya laughed softly when I teased him about his messy hair. Before leaving for a short walk, Daniel turned to me and said quietly, "Thank you, Mom, for not judging us, for just being here." I smiled. That's what mothers do, son. We hold the door open until our children are ready to walk through it again. They both smiled, and I watched them step out together, this time side by side, not apart. As they walked down the driveway, I noticed the way Maya slipped her hand into his. It was such a small gesture, but it meant everything. And in that simple moment, I knew something had changed. They weren't fixed yet, not fully, but they had chosen to stay, to keep trying. And that was enough. That was the turning point. Not a grand apology, not a sudden miracle, just two people facing truth, holding hands in the rain, and deciding to keep walking. For me, it was a reminder too, that love isn't about controlling or rescuing. It's about waiting quietly, believing gently, and opening your heart again and again, even when it hurts. And as I stood by the window watching them disappear down the road, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. The days after that morning felt lighter. There was a new stillness in the house. Not the uncomfortable kind that had filled it before, but a soft, healing quiet. It was the kind of silence that follows after tears, when hearts begin to settle again. Daniel and Maya started helping more around the house. They cooked dinner together, shared laughter over burnt toast, and took evening walks in the garden. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes their smiles still carried a shadow, but I could see they were trying. And sometimes, trying is the most powerful form of love. One morning, I found them sitting on the porch steps, talking quietly. Maya leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder, and he was holding her hand gently. I didn't want to interrupt, so I just watched from the kitchen window for a while. The sunlight fell softly across their faces, and I thought, maybe this is what healing looks like. Not loud, not dramatic, but slow and tender, like grass growing after a storm. Later that day, while Maya was folding laundry, she looked up and said softly, "Mom, can I tell you something?" "Of course, dear," I said, setting down my cup. She smiled faintly. "I was so scared that day. When we came here, I thought you'd be angry, that you'd judge us for failing." I shook my head gently. "Why would I be angry?" She hesitated, then said, "Because we didn't plan it. We didn't call. We just showed up, bringing all our problems with us." I reached out and touched her hand. "Maya, when you come to someone with your problems, you're not bringing trouble. You're bringing trust. You came because somewhere, deep inside, you still believed this was a safe place." Tears filled her eyes. She nodded, whispering, "It is." She stood up and hugged me. Not the polite kind of hug we used to share, but a real one. Warm, tight, honest. For the first time, I felt her heart against mine. And in that moment, something old and distant between us finally broke. Not in pain, but in understanding. That evening, Daniel came home with a small smile on his face. "I had a meeting today. A company I applied to called me back. They said they want to start with a short-term contract." Maya's face lit up instantly. "Oh, Daniel, that's wonderful." He nodded, smiling modestly. "It's not much, but it's a start." I walked over and hugged him. "A start is exactly what you need." He looked at me, his eyes soft. "You know, Mom, I think losing everything taught me something. For the first time, I'm not chasing success. I just want to live honestly, with her, with myself." Maya squeezed his hand, and for a moment, it felt like time stood still. 3 people, standing in a small kitchen, bound not by perfection, but by truth. The next few weeks were filled with quiet routines. Daniel started his new job, working from home most days. Maya began helping me in the garden, planting herbs and flowers. We talked a lot, not about the past, but about small things. Recipes, books, the way the evening light hit the roses. life began to feel normal again. Ordinary, but peaceful. One Sunday, we decided to cook a big lunch together. It was Maya's idea. She wanted to make one of Robert's old recipes, his favorite roasted chicken with lemon and herbs. The house filled with the smell of garlic and rosemary, and for the first time in a long while, I heard laughter ringing through the walls. As we sat down to eat, I noticed how comfortable they looked together again. Their shoulders touched as they passed dishes, their eyes met when they spoke. It wasn't the same as before. It was quieter, deeper, the kind of connection that comes only after surviving something difficult together. After lunch, as we cleared the table, Daniel said, "Mom, we've been thinking, maybe it's time we find our own place again." I paused for a moment. The words hit me softly, like the echo of something I knew was coming. I smiled, even though my heart ached a little. "That sounds wonderful," I said. "Have you found one yet?" "Not yet," Maya said, smiling. "But we're looking. We just wanted to tell you first." I nodded. "You'll know when it's the right one, and you'll always have this house to come back to." They both smiled, and I could see a quiet gratitude in their eyes, the kind that doesn't need words. A few days later, I was out in the garden when Maya joined me. She knelt beside me, helping me trim the roses. After a while, she said, "Mom, can I tell you something else?" "Of course, dear." When I first married Daniel, I wanted to be the perfect wife. I wanted everything to look right. But when things started falling apart, I didn't know how to handle it. I thought if we failed, it meant I failed. I listened quietly as she continued, her voice trembling a little. "But staying here, with you, showed me something. I saw how you live with calmness, even when things don't go as planned. You don't panic, you don't blame, you just breathe through it. I think that's what saved us." Her words touched me deeply. I smiled and said, "Oh, Maya, I'm not as calm as I seem. I just learned that peace doesn't come from life being easy. It comes from trusting that pain won't last forever." She looked at me with gentle eyes. "You make it sound simple." I smiled faintly. "Simple, yes. Easy, never." We laughed softly, and the garden felt alive around us. The rustle of leaves, the hum of bees, the warmth of the afternoon sun. It struck me then, sometimes healing doesn't look like big apologies or dramatic moments. Sometimes it's just two women trimming roses, talking about pain, and choosing kindness over pride. Weeks passed. Daniel's new job began to settle into a routine. He seemed more confident, lighter, as if the burden he had carried for months was finally gone. He and Maya found a small apartment a few miles away, cozy and bright. They came to me one evening with the news. "Mom, we signed the lease today. We move in next week." I smiled. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Maya added, "It's small, but it feels right. We wanted you to see it first." "Of course," I said, my heart full and aching all at once. That weekend, we visited their new place, a little second-floor apartment with sunlight streaming through the windows and the faint smell of new paint. It wasn't grand, but it was filled with warmth. Maya had already placed a small vase of flowers on the table. Daniel was unpacking boxes with a grin that reminded me of the boy he used to be. "This is perfect," I said. "It feels like home already." Daniel smiled. "It does, doesn't it?" We shared a quiet moment there, just standing, breathing, feeling the weight of change. When I left later that day, Maya hugged me tightly. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered, "for everything." I smiled. "Just promise me one thing." "Anything," she said. "Keep talking to each other, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "We will." The day they moved out, the house felt both empty and full. Empty because their laughter and footsteps were gone. Full because they left behind something invisible, the warmth of their healing, the echo of their love. I walked through the quiet rooms, touching the walls, straightening a cushion here, a photo there. And then I sat in the same chair I had sat in that first morning, when they arrived unannounced, rain falling outside, my heart uncertain. So much had changed since then. That morning, they brought their pain to my door. Now, they had walked away carrying hope. I smiled to myself and whispered, "They'll be all right." Outside, the sun was setting. The sky glowed with soft gold and pink, the colors of endings and beginnings. I made myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and listened to the sounds of evening, birds settling, wind rustling through the trees. For the first time in months, I didn't feel lonely. I felt grateful. Because I had learned something too, that love doesn't always come in the way we expect. Sometimes it knocks on your door with a moving truck and a storm behind it. Sometimes it breaks your peace, only to give it back to you stronger. That night, before going to bed, I took out the small framed photo of Robert and me from the shelf. I held it close and whispered, "You would have been proud, you know. Our boy found his way again." The photo didn't answer, of course, but I could almost feel his quiet smile in the air around me. I placed the picture back on the shelf and turned off the light. As I walked down the hall, I passed the guest room, now empty again, but glowing faintly in the moonlight. I paused for a moment, touched the door frame, and said softly, "Thank you for what you held, for what you healed." Then I closed the door gently. The next morning, I woke up early, made myself tea, and stepped out into the garden. The roses were in bloom again, full and bright, glistening with dew. I bent down to touch one and smiled. The world was quiet, but it didn't feel silent anymore. It felt alive. And as I stood there, breathing in the morning air, I realized something simple yet profound. Love doesn't end when people leave your house. It stays. In the air, in the memories, in the lessons. It changes shape, but never disappears. That's what family is. Not perfect people living without mistakes, but hearts that keep finding their way back to each other again and again. And maybe that's what my story was really about. Not about my son losing a job, or my daughter-in-law leaving for a day, or even the moving truck at my door. It was about love. How it bends, breaks, and still somehow endures. So I stood there in my little garden, sunlight touching my face, and whispered one final thought to the quiet morning air. When my son and daughter-in-law moved in without warning, I thought it was an interruption, but it turned out to be a blessing, a reminder that even unexpected arrivals can bring us exactly what our hearts need. And with that, I smiled, picked up my cup, and let the day begin. It's been almost 6 months since Daniel and Maya moved out. The house is quiet again, but it doesn't feel empty anymore. There's a difference between loneliness and peace, and now I finally know what peace feels like. Every now and then I still hear echoes of those days. The sound of their laughter in the kitchen, the soft creak of the stairs when Daniel came down late at night for a snack, Maya's gentle humming while she watered the plants. They've all become part of the house now, like memories that live in the walls. Sometimes when I'm having my evening tea, I catch myself smiling for no reason. I think about that morning when they arrived, scared, lost, carrying their whole world in boxes. And I remember how easily I could have reacted differently. I could have asked, "Why didn't you call first?" I could have felt angry or overwhelmed or hurt. But instead, something inside me whispered, "Stay calm. Just open the door." And that simple choice, to open the door instead of closing my heart, changed everything. A few weeks ago, Daniel and Maya invited me to dinner at their new place. When I arrived, the table was already set, candles flickering softly. Their apartment was small, but it felt alive. There was warmth in every corner. Books on the shelves, plants by the window, laughter floating in the air. Maya hugged me first. "Welcome home, Mom," she said. I smiled at her choice of words. Home. Dinner was simple and full of joy. We talked about work, neighbors, the little things that make up a life. And when I looked at them, sitting side by side, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Contentment. After dinner, Daniel handed me a small wrapped box. "It's nothing fancy," he said, a little shyly. I opened it carefully. Inside was a framed photo. The three of us in my garden, smiling. Below it, in small handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for being our safe place." I didn't say anything for a moment. My throat felt tight. I just reached out and held both their hands, one in each of mine. "Always," I said softly, "you'll always have a safe place with me." When I came home that night, I placed that photo on the mantle. I looked at it for a long time. It reminded me that love doesn't always look like perfection. Sometimes it looks like late-night conversations, silent forgiveness, or shared cups of tea after tears. It looks like showing up, even when you don't have all the answers. We spend so much of our lives trying to build things that last, careers, savings, stability. But in the end, what truly lasts are moments of kindness, the times we choose patience over pride, love over fear, and understanding over judgment. Because one day the things we build may fall apart, but the love we share, that becomes part of who we are. It stays. Now, when it rains, I still think of that morning. The sound of thunder, the knock at the door, the sight of that moving truck parked outside. At the time, it felt like the start of chaos, but now I see it differently. It was the beginning of healing for them and for me. It was life's way of reminding me that family isn't about convenience. It's about showing up when life feels heavy and standing together in the storm. Sometimes love enters quietly. Sometimes it arrives in the middle of a downpour, carrying boxes and broken hearts. But if you open the door, if you let it in, it can change everything. I often walk through my garden now, touching the leaves, watching new buds bloom. Each flower feels like a memory, a soft reminder that growth takes time, but it always comes back, even after the coldest seasons. If you were sitting here with me right now, I'd tell you this: don't be afraid when life surprises you. Don't close your heart when something unexpected knocks on your door. Maybe it's not trouble. Maybe it's love arriving in disguise, waiting to teach you something beautiful. I learned that day that peace doesn't mean having control. It means trusting that love will guide you through what you don't understand yet. And forgiveness, quiet, patient forgiveness, can turn even the hardest moments into blessings. So now, whenever I sip my tea and watch the sunset fade away over the garden, I whisper to myself, sometimes the hardest days are the ones that bring us closer. Sometimes losing peace helps us find a deeper kind of peace. And sometimes, when love seems to walk out of the door, it's actually finding its way back home. The story of that day isn't just mine anymore. It belongs to anyone who's ever opened their door with trembling hands and found grace waiting on the other side. So if your loved ones ever show up, tired, lost, or broken, don't rush to ask why. Just offer a place to rest. Because sometimes being a safe place for someone else becomes the way we heal ourselves. And that, I think, is what life is really about. Love doesn't always come with a plan. Sometimes it just comes home,